Thank you again for staying with us on the program this morning. Two issues, as I already said at the top of the show, that we're looking at on TMI. I want to start with a very critical one, even though both of them ultimately are critical. The Chinese loans, which has become very controversial. But again, from what we are hearing today regarding these loans, excuse me, it's safe to say that there's a history to it. It's been a long time coming. We're now seeing essentially a real kind of string of projects that we can say essentially they are a far cry from what we had before. I mean, a step in the right direction. We're making some progress, even though some persons say we should have had, as it were, a quantum leap on that front. But there's also the question of the volume of loans that we've collected so far for the real, and then in particular, the dynamics around the agreements surrounding these financial instruments that Nigeria has enjoyed and, as it were, continues to enjoy from the Chinese authorities. We also want to look at the palpable fears that Nigerians and, in particular, experts have come to express as to the ramifications of these agreements. Again, especially in light of the probe that's been set up by the House of Representatives Committee on Treaties and Protocol. And then we'll move on to the next issue, which has to do with the power sector and all of the funding that we've seen in that sector, all of the releases and vis-a-vis the amount of development, or if you like, progress that we've seen as far as power sector is concerned in Nigeria. I'm joined by three gentlemen. Two of them are with me live in the studio. Then I have one who is joining virtually via Skype this morning. I have Reverend Olu Martin, civil rights activist. We appreciate you coming on the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And next to him is a gentleman who hasn't been here for a while, but this morning he's here to lend his voice to these two issues. Evangelist Tony Kenny Liumua. He's a civil rights activist. He's also an author. He's been lending his voice to all of these issues over time. He's the coordinator of Nigeria Cannot Continue Like This. I mean, the list is endless for you in particular. It's a pleasure to have you in the program as well.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Let's also be sure we have Austin Osakwe live with us this morning via Skype, who happens to be the Executive Director, Foundation for Good Governance and Social Change. Comrade Austin Osakwe, it's a pleasure to have you in the program as well.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and good morning to our viewers across the globe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Let's begin with Reverend Olu Martin, who is with us here live in the studio this morning. I've seen you do a lot of work regarding the power sector, for example. But it will appear essentially that is more or less an interface between members of the public and the schools themselves. But a lot of persons are saying, look, the issues we're dealing with as far as the power sector is concerned are deeper than that. They are systemic, they are structural. How would you respond to these developments?
I totally agree, because the bedrock of development for any nation is power, and without power, there's nothing that you can do. Well, without power, whether spiritual or physical, there really is anything. There really isn't, anything that you can do. So when the so-called privatization of the power sector, do not forget what we began from ECN to NEPA, which has refused to go. We moved to PHCN before we now have the 11 discos scattered across the 36 states of the Federation. And the arguments have been that that privatization, as bettered by the former Vice President of Nigeria, Namadi Sambo, was shoddy. Many of the people who bought all the different discos appears to be friends and cronies of the government at that time, and that the privatization essentially was to reward them for their political patronage, because the arguments have been that they haven't shown the competency required to manage the power sector and to bring about the necessary deliverables. On the side of the investors in the power sector, they also saw a carrot and moved into, there was a certain service charge that people were supposed to pay, whether you were consuming.
That's 750 naira flat.
Yes, that's for a room. All right. Yes, that's for that. It's not flat. That's for a room. As you moved up, you paid more. Hotels that were paying 19,000 naira, they were
on a monthly basis.
Yes, there were industries that were paying as much as 49,000 naira. All right, whether they consume electricity or not. And then we moved to the streets. and then that was abolished. So we've seen all manner of practices at the power sector to suggest that the guys who went there didn't also do their homework and they just moved in because
the discourse, you mean?
Yes, they thought it was going to be lucrative because when you invest in somewhere, so you buy over a facility, the first thing that we do is that we think that you do a makeover, you put some money in it because you want to make profit. But in this particular case, because of the monopolistic approach to power, because all of the electric poles are owned by one person, right. So even if you want to have alternative sources, it's unlikely that you are going to be able to do it. So because it was monopolistic, people quickly moved into it without the required, competencies across board. They now want the consumer, so to speak, to give them the money they will require to be able to do something in the private sector. So as it stands today, Nigeria over the years still hovers between a very ridiculous 3,000 to 5,000 megawatts at its peak. Whereas you have smaller nations like Ghana, who are already celebrating years of uninterrupted,
within the same West Africa sub-region.
Yeah, even some of the ones that we, supply electricity to, in the West African, sub-region, are able to manage, their power sector very well. Ideally, it should be 1,000 megawatts per. I think it is 1,000 megawatts per 1 million people. That's that's a recommendation. So ideally, Nigeria should, have. No less than to be able to run, you should be looking at about maybe like 200,000 megawatts. All right, but we're still
at the minimum maybe 100,000.
Yeah, at the minimum. But look at what. So if you look at that kind of statistics, you'll find out that we have not been able to move out of that.
The government is projecting for 25,000 megawatts by 2025. Is that a shortfall?
Why I like government and their projections are that. Like F.R. Williams said, the only way you can know the next 5 years is to be able to look at the past 5 years and look at where all of the projections, have brought us into. It is safe to say that the challenge is not even in generation. The Gencos, can generate. The easiest part of it is the generation. Yeah.
But how do you generate?
Yes, the challenging part of it is the transmission. As we speak now, the grid, Nigeria's grid cannot even take 7,000. If you pump 7,000 to Nigeria's grid, it will collapse. Look at all of the wires and some of the poles in some of these. Many of them have not been changed, and then you see nodes, and upon every node there's loss of power. So it's like what Jesus Christ said, that you can't put new wine in old wine skins, or put old wine in new wine skins. Both of them have got to be new. So if you want to have fresh injection through all of the substations coming through the transmission lines, you're going to it's going to collapse. And then the challenging thing about the power sector is that except you have embedded power, most of the time a state like Edo State, like the government try to do with Osio might generate, for instance, 10 megawatts or 25 megawatts, 100 megawatts. A lot of times you have to generate the same thing you would do with petrol, except you now have to be able to have your own fresh lines, right? Like I saying, where you generate from, you can imagine transporting electricity from here, to the national grid, transport it back to the different states according to some kind of formula, that are being for Edo to survive. For instance, on the average, we need 400 megawatts of electricity. But guess what? The Benin Disco gets what the Benin Disco gets on the average is the same, is barely the same 400, but the 400 is now distributed across 4 states.
Where they serve.
Where they serve. So you can understand what the load sharing.
So in the end, it's depleted.
Yes. So since the private sector since it has been privatized, the only thing that we now probably get to see is that for some areas there's plan. You can actually when you have electricity, we don't have electricity.
Like
yes, but all of the things has been always having to I hear your plans working. I'm not on the I also say that they are trying to kind of system that
the integrity of those that have been trusted to manage these facilities, to manage the men that ought to manage the systems. Before now, let's go back a little back to history. Before 2007, Brazil spent $2 billion, and the end result was that they got 12,000 megawatts. Within the same period, Nigeria assessed $13.5 billion. After that same period, or within that same period, I'm going to speak, we have come anywhere near 12,000 megawatts. So what is the difference between what obtains in Brazil and what obtains here? The difference is simply lack of it. It's also marvelous. So annoying to a lot of people who ought to know that in the head comes up nowadays. The House of Representatives. And which remember that now, how have we actually investigated out of the Unity Committee? Well, I know that it's religious members, government religious funds to enable that meeting travel and assist the country areas in order to have on the spot assessment of the power facilities, the problems and the obstacles on ground. It was the summation of all of these efforts that came to the 88 recommendations. Now, what happens? On the floor of the House, these recommendations, which includes the unbundling of the power sector, which eventually has taken off, though epileptically, these recommendations were torn by fellow members of the House. Why? Because they indicted very grievously almost every sector of government, especially the executive and even the National Assembly. And because it was going to have a backlash, put a large question mark on those who were in charge of the government. All of these things were swept under the carpet. So for us to solve all of these things, we have Nigerians that are so gifted, Nigerians that are so versatile, Nigerians that are so vast in what, in all of these technicalities that can actually put them on ground. But in every community of humans, you need a management core that is true to its purpose of good governance, essentially, in order to actualize the objectives of any design. I cannot help but emphasize again the fact that Brazil spent $12 billion and, as at 2007, had 12,000 megawatts. They have increased that since that time. But Nigeria is oscillating between 2,000 megawatts, all the provinces, but also ahead of countries. So put us all of this, do we agree that Nigeria continue?
Let's go to this like the idea of the student well with electricity. Like we recently not funding going to pass sector from the percent around $60 will also be the funding for the so it's a big mistake to point this country it would more says that was addressed in the book. Now the House of Representatives since 1990 has been having any fasting. The CBN even cannot account for well over 11 billion as of today as far as funding for the power sector is concerned. First, what does that say about transparency in our approach to development? And second, the capacity of those who are charged with the responsibility of ensuring that Nigeria makes a real-time progress economically and socially.
My brothers in the studio, they've laid a foundation very beautifully. I'll start by saying that power in every society is a sine qua non for development. No country can begin to talk about developing without getting power right. And if you are looking for reasons why Nigeria has remained a toddler in the Committee of Nations, the first thing you need to look at is our state of power. Clearly, we haven't got anywhere. Now, let me lay some building bricks. Power was privatized in this country. The reason for privatization anywhere in the world is to extricate a particular sector from corruption and from wastage. What has happened in the case of privatization of power, and indeed every other thing in Nigeria, is that whereas we purport to have privatized the power sector, government is still effectively involved. That's no privatization. Now the result is that the corruption that you wanted to remove, the wastage you wanted to remove, have remained. I think Olumatis made the point that when we privatized, we simply handed over to the cronies, the stooges of those who were in government at that time, and they still have remained there. Now, let's be very clear about this. You can set up all kinds of committees. You can set up all kinds of probes. As long as those who are setting up probes, the major actors, have the chance of the sleeves they come to represent. you will continue to have underdevelopment, you continue to have all these problems. I'll give you an example. So talking about the removal of the fixed charge. The gains that we got from the removal of this charge were lost because we now began a regime of estimated billions. And that has even become worse than what it was when the charges were there. Now look at across the country, the discos keep insisting that they own infrastructure. And the bicycles will be paid on a monthly basis. But when there's a fault with the transformer, the owner, which is the disco, they does not care. So what you find is that members of a particular community having suffered in darkness for several months begin to put money together to either get a new transformer or give hand the money over to discos to effect repairs in the transformer. And what we have found, and we are the victims of this, they collect money from community A and go to community B ostensibly to repair a good transformer and transfer that one to community A and keep community B in darkness. We are the ones who have to pay for foreign wires. We are the ones who have to service transformers. We contribute money to give to discos to do that what they primarily ought to do. Now, when you privatize, you engender a regime of effective public service delivery. So the question you ask is, since privatization, have we had improvement in the past the service? Well, no. People have gotten used to just living in darkness. And then, if you watch in all the work within now, people are going to install where we give up water. We moved away from public water supply and entered into a regime of, if you are building a house, you put the cost of borehole in it. That's what we are going now in the past. And yeah, this is why I'm going around collecting money. There's no transparency, there's no accountability, there's no probability. We don't know what's happening in the power sector. It's mired in all kinds of mysteries. And this is deliberate because it provides an opportunity for players in that sector to just put in their.
No, so I actually want to question before I some of the issues about the power sector. Nigeria has leveraged a partnership with a couple of international development partners. You have more issues like the World Bank. The last example, for example, is some $750 million courtesy of the World Bank. Which means a lot of money, so much money from international development partners. Not that a lot of people have little or nothing to show for all of these monies. What does it make us look like in the face of, before these partners, because overall, Nigeria must show commitment. In some cases, we have to repay these loans because ultimately that's what they are. We must find a way, directly or indirectly, to defray them over a certain period. But again, what are the ramifications? What impression does it give of us as a country, as a government, and as a people to these international partners?
I want to use this opportunity to appeal to development partners and these other agencies who are always in a hurry to come and offer loans to Nigeria to stop giving one like. The truth of the matter is that over which we go to borrow huge sums are just an excuse for people to get loans to their markets. You get millions of dollars. We don't see anything on ground. What are they using it for? And as long as these people are willing to offer loans, Nigeria will continue to collect loans. And we see nothing as a product of those loans. So let them stop giving us loans. The truth of the matter is this. No country is coming to help you develop your power sector. I want the Nigerian government to cite one example of a country that got its power sector right because of that country's came to its rescue. It doesn't exist. We need to first decide what do we want to do. Are we remaining with hydro power generation? Are we going nuclear? Going solar? For a long time, I have been part of a group that tried to develop a new energy policy for Nigeria through renewables. To even get it, to get the National Assembly to give it attention, it's a Herculean. You take it to the floor of National Assembly and they are asking you to bring money so that they can even introduce it. Before we now started talking of entrenching a policy and making a law out of it. So nobody cares. Everybody within government sees the power sector as a cash cow. So they go to borrow. It has become a ritual. They borrow money, they share the money, put it in their pocket, they go for another round of borrowing. We are seeing nothing on ground. This country has what it takes to get the power sector right. First get the policy right. Let's address what exactly do we want. Is it nuclear? Is it renewables? Are we continuing with hydro? And if we are, what are we putting in place by way of infrastructure? There is so much money being generated which finds its way into the practical. Look, if we don't get transparency and accountability right in that sector, if we let's borrow from the whole world. We are not going to get anything out of it. to hold their rulers accountable for every cent that they borrow from outside. Because we have not been able to hold them to account for what is generated locally or what we sell from oil. Is it the one they go to borrow that we're going to ask them to account for? It's a borrowing spree that achieves nothing. So if you ask me, please, international community, don't give us a kobo anymore to fix that which we ought to have fixed long ago. But we've forgotten that in this country we have ECN. I grew up with the ECN. And whenever there was power interruption, you could predict that in the next 1 hour it would be back. There was power. What has happened to us is the regime of corruption, where we now have people feasting on public institutions as a way of aggrandizing themselves.
All right, we're going to talk about accountability and a few other elements regarding this issue, especially transparency too, as it touches on matters of these Chinese loans. But just to wrap it up, talking about the power sector, I want to talk to Martins again quickly. Austin Osakwe talked about sleaze in the power sector. That's just look, one way Nigerian government can show that they are keen of when they fail. You sure that that's from the judge has been reflected. All right, conscious as a system. How can we make ourselves if we have non-liberal tackles around the geography?
I mean, very is that corruption is in the federation, is allocation of the DIOP from the federal. Corruption in Nigeria is not common. Anything about culture is the culture is strong in the law. To matter legislation, once the corruption, people are going to disregard. For instance, I'm sure every law that in several policies and laws to bring. All right, because the culture here, even though I guess of laws, so then whole activity, and then we start in human expression. So you I have assignments that they are not how can have a proper in Nigeria. So that's the article. It's the same thing when country comes. The doctor said, if you go behind, it's in China. And have to also. That with corruption become behemoth, and for which almost everybody is guilty of. It's going to be difficult to put money in any sector whatsoever. Like he was saying, and I'll give you a practical example. Ndiyelumelu was doing the power sector probe under President Olusegun Obasanjo. Right. We're talking about, is it 16, 10 billion? They were bantering figures all around. And there were several revelations. Guess what happened? The Rural Electrification Agency gave Ndiyelumele's company a contract to connect certain communities to the national grid. And the turn of it was 6 billion naira. And it just gave him a few moments. After a while, he was supposed to retire those funds, having done a face of it. And then he wasn't properly able to account for 6 billion naira. Now he is investigating the power sector to the tune of 10 or 16 billion. You have a contract in the same power sector to the tune of 6 billion naira, and then you cannot account for it. So the question became, they began to ask the question, who will police, the police? So, I mean, consensus added them that if we don't deal with corruption, not just in the power sector, all right, you're going to continue to have these issues that we're having. How do you have an alcoholic who is selling alcohol? Somebody is an alcoholic and he is selling beer to the public. Is it not clear that he's going to be bankrupt because he's going to consume his own, product? So if you have people who are kleptomaniac, all right, people whose vision ab initio was to get into public office for the purpose of aggregating public funds for their own private use, no matter how much you give to them, the foundation of the reason we get the public is to let the private pockets. So once you the money for the and you see going to buy just looks at, okay, especially if it's a governor or it's a local government chairman, just look at the which road can I do now, and then you just give a bogus amount. Somebody buy your house. So you just tar the road or to provide that infrastructure. So the idea that you were looking for your own kickback so that you can take care, of your own, private. So as long as we don't deal with corruption, and I join, to come out that the national organizations should hold further assistance, because nation will move forward. First of what is with your own money before you can talk about other people's. In business sector, there's what we call other people's money. Before you can do business, other people's money, you want to be able to say what have you done with it. If you have a business that you need about 500,000, and the television in the house is 95,000. If you are passionate about the business, we expect that you first of all sell television, and then as your own equity contribution before you start going out to ask for loans. But if you are watching television and you're watching business, you're free telling you by watching your own television, and then you say you you are carrying to give you money, self-sufficient. Everyone believe in the mission. You can own resources, but make progress. You don't want to say, look, we don't exercise militarization. So many people do more. You don't want money. Then you will also do more for the progress.
Let's take an issue about the power sector before we talk about the Chinese loans. Back now to Tony. We understand as of today, Nigeria is already we're making progress. Again, progress in this context is relative, depending on who is defining and who is doing the assessment. There's a deal Nigeria has signed now with AG Siemens to say, look, let's move power capability or capacity from 11,000 megawatts to 25,000 megawatts over the next 5 years, which of course wraps up by 2025. That deal, we understand from reports, is worth $100 billion. First, that's a whole lot of money. Two, so much is at stake. But is there a chance it is not going to go the same way as we have seen previously?
Not a single chance. I can tell you that straight away, without hesitation. As long as the formula we have on ground, the model that we have on ground, is still the one that we are depending on to administer any loan that is coming in. Like we have all seen, and it's transparent to all, any money, any funding coming into the Nigerian political cultural system, everybody who is involved has a stake, a personal stake first before the public interest. So the ministry through which it is going to be assessed, the ministers that are going to supervise it, the personnel that are going to administer them, they are all involved in this culture of corruption. So at what point in time are you going to have a collective repentance, collective turnaround in spirit and attitude that will make any loan coming in to have the impact that it is designed for? I want to very truly align myself with the approach. As a matter of fact, we should keep on liberalizing in terms of we should take it seriously. We should take the corridor government. And especially now, the corridor is so-called international partners. A matter of fact, the consistency which they continue to be loans to the destination of Nigeria, a very transparent history of failure. Thanks to the fact, even the personnel are involved in negotiating and assessing these loans of developers, they themselves cost. Because if you're not corrupt, for instance, you give a loan to a neighbor, who can tell you say that what he has loan for, he's using it frivolously. Because he the reason that he has to move, and he didn't know, then you yourself have that. So we no matter how you do the nomenclature, no matter how active the king you see to by now, I want us to appeal as inside energy in civil society. You know about criticizing from all this. It's not time for meetings. And much to be able into government stuff. That's what it's all about. It is agreed that the national community we are going. What is not we have been talking in government in the hands of people who have knowledge. That's what we are consuming today. But just we are going more today. So the president came by us. Where is it? Where is their faith? Where is the right life? So my take is whatever laws we are talking about, it is very totally on all the laws that are taken before today. And then there's back and policy. And then where there are defaults, those who are found to be wanting in the application or mobilization of these loans, we should see them properly in jail. That will give confidence to us Nigerians that anybody that is going to manage our loans now will be aware of the consequences and therefore
in the event that they overstep their bounds.
Yes, and therefore do the right thing.
Okay.
So that is my appeal.